Interesting topic, and I'll tell you why. Neelima ji, I'm starting with you because you are famous and sometimes infamous for exposing family secrets in your books. Very prominent family of India and your personal family too in another book. So do you believe that privacy is a fundamental right or not? Mike?
Hello, everybody. Actually, if I'm here to defend privacy, I'm on the wrong panel. Because while I feel that privacy is not an absolute, and I, who have been labeled dubiously as a daredevil chronicler of family secrets, my family, I haven't intruded on anybody else's. So I would say that I have chronicled family secrets and biographies of people within my family who have lived alternate lives. So I feel as far as the right to privacy goes, I should have the right to express with freedom, without criminal intrusion, whatever has happened with me and whatever I feel I would like to share with the world. So privacy is not an absolute. I want my privacy. I don't want an eye in the sky watching every movement of mine and storing it somewhere in some iCloud. And yet I want parts of my life, or at my discretion, I want to share on public platforms what I feel is good for me, is useful for me, or is simply entertaining for me.
Okay, I just want to quickly follow that up by asking you a bit provocatively that you said that, you want bits of your life to stay private, what you want, but then your family, of course, argued that you put out secrets that they wanted to stay private about your family.
Good question, Uday. At that point, there was 18 siblings. See, my father's led a very, very colorful, flamboyant life, and I don't know anybody else who fits that bill. He belonged to the last century, a pioneer industrialist of India, the first owner of the Times of India. He had 6 wives. We are 18 siblings. I am the 4th child of his 6th wife. Apart from the fact that he had an extremely successful economic graph, like a rags to rich story, which everybody knows. But I, being a psychologist, felt the need for myself primarily to discover what was it that drove my father into his sexual life, why did he marry so many women, what was he seeking, and how it impacted me as a child, one of 18. So I think I had a right to do that.
Okay. Let me bring you in here, Saumya, on your views on the topic. Do you believe the right to privacy should be fundamental, should be absolute in the country that we live in today? The Supreme Court has held it true, but is it actually implemented on ground?
I would think that it is absolute, and I say this from a more sort of a macro perspective, in the sense, of course, one can write about their families, but there is something quite serious about at what point something like security concerns end and surveillance begins, right? So my point of view would be more from the perspective of what our data can mean for state surveillance, what our data can mean for private parties that are harvesting it, and what it could mean for the most vulnerable minorities in the country. So I would think as a right, right to liberty is something that evolves. Rights by their very definitions are not what they were when we first imagined them. They are layered because of context. So the way in which we viewed liberty is very different from what liberty is in post-internet age. And I would think it's absolutely necessary in where India stands today to have some sort of a conversation about what surveillance is, what data harvesting might mean, and what it just means for an individual to have their privacy protected.
No, but it's quite interesting, and you've written on divorce as well. So I'd like to ask you on this topic that the Supreme Court, in fact, has said that it will consider on whether a spouse's fundamental right to privacy can be breached if adultery allegations are leveled.
See, Uday, marriage and divorce is messy business. So all sorts of things happen. People have private detectives to inquire after people they're potentially marrying. But you have to realize adultery is only a crime in the eyes of your partner. It's not a crime in the eyes of the state. So I think the trouble really is, and the example that strikes out for me, is before 377 was defanged and decriminalized, we had a very famous case of a professor in Aligarh, which was also, there was a movie made about this, and what it could mean for sexual minorities to not have their privacy protected in a country where we had a law that essentially criminalized their sexual preference. And that's what makes privacy really important for me in intimate relationships, right? And this is not so much an argument to say that, oh, in a marriage, can you not apply all sorts of devious means to find out about what your partner is up to? That is something that is to be negotiated. Marriage is a contract between two individuals, but it's quite another when the state gets involved, or for that matter, a third party gets involved.
Okay. Well, we are a country where, reality shows like Big Boss do very well. We love looking into other people's lives. In fact, one of Manu Joseph's book also was The Illicit Happiness of Other People. Even though that is not based on this topic, that is quite an interesting title because we often look at happiness or sadness of other people and get intrigued by it. But Manu, your views on the topic. Do you believe that this right should be fundamental in our country? And are Supreme Court judgments on it actually being applied in practical terms?
Good morning. I think my panel members have taken the for and against position. So I want to talk about the fundamental part, whether is it a fundamental right? What do we mean by fundamental right? It's something which sounds very serious. See, there was a time not very long ago when I was a kid, when my father's name was not carried in the telephone directory. As in, I don't know, if young people may not know this, but there was a time when every subscriber's name and number was published in a big Bible-like thing, which was called the telephone directory. So when my father's name was missed out or there was a misspelling, he would call the telephone company and scream at them. Why my number? Like people used to scream at the government for not carrying their numbers so that everybody can see their numbers. Today, we've reached a position where we shout at the government for not hiding a 10-digit number like Adhar, or why are you exposing my number? So I understand the qualitative difference of so-called data, the amount of data that we are generating, like a body fluid, is kind of much higher now, I realize that. But still, at some point, we became private. We were never private. My grandparents were never private, In fact, everybody shared the same room. And this, in fact, in olden times, the whole idea that we see in TV series that a king has a huge bedroom with a huge bed in which he sleeps alone or with 4 women, all his queens. That's not true. In fact, most kings lived with the whole village in their palace. In fact, very few people had their own rooms. So what I'm trying to come at is that privacy is a new thing. There are, I feel, in a very non-legal luminary definition of rights, I think there are 2 rights. I think there are rights from antiquity, which are old rights, which we felt as rights even before we knew what rights were, like the right to live, a right to even sex, which we don't talk about in this country, and right to livelihood, right to follow your own faith. People defended these rights. People who don't know the meaning of rights can defend these rights with their lives. But then there are sophisticated rights, there are modern rights, there are esoteric rights, like right to be forgotten on the internet and the right to privacy, By the way, I'm quite fond of the right to privacy, but I feel that it is a new modern right.
In fact, just quickly following up on that, you've written an article as well, just a few days ago, on why Manu Joseph believes that the right to privacy in our country is actually not having any mass appeal. Why do you believe that?
Yes. Exactly because of this. Modern and sophisticated rights don't have any mass appeal. You go out on the road and then you talk to them about right to privacy. They don't have privacy in their homes. We have given them small homes and small lives. It is not something that they are used to. And for most Indians, only matters of nudity and what nudity can do is perceived as privacy, and even that may not be in some cases. In fact, I know many people for whom it wouldn't be. And privacy, in fact, is so new. There is a lot. See, I think the West, when we say who's the West, what is the West? West is a way of speaking, and it is a form of religion. And a lot of ideas come from the West, which we think are natural human instincts. They are not. They are propagated. For example, I find what is most interesting about privacy is that very sophisticated people now champion it, and the news media champions privacy. But the origin of privacy is in American aristocracy in the form of two lawyers from Boston who wanted to gag the free press. It was, in fact, the privacy movement begins in America in the late 19th century as a movement against the gossip press to protect the rich of America. And in time, it became something which everybody was made to feel hysterical about. That Adhar, you mentioned Adhar. Like if you want to figure out will you get along with this person or not. In fact, even for actually dating sites should have this question. This guy is for Adhar and this guy is Adhar, against Adhar. Do you think you will get along with? I think it's a personality type. It's like personality type. So privacy has become this, while it's an important right, there is a strand of hysteria in it.
Okay. And you've quoted examples from the West, from the United States. We also remember in the UK, there were those phone tapping, charges leveled on gossip, on tabloids. In fact, Prince Harry also testified, becoming the first royal to do so very, very recently. But Neelima ji, you wanted to add something?
I want to say that while I ferociously demand protection of my freedom of speech, I want to decide what I express, what I want to write on, and I won't go into it now, but I have met with severe challenges because my writings are always alternate. And for instance, I'm writing now on a mythological figure, Radha, and I have to really be mindful of what I'm writing for fear of attracting fanatical voices and being the book getting into trouble. Whereas I ferociously demand that. I'm going to read this out. I do not want the internet to watch me. I don't want them to see what sites I visit. I don't want the television to be customizing itself to know what it does about me. I don't want to mortgage every detail of my life to some unknown eye in the sky. So it's a very fine balance between what I want to allow invaded in terms of my privacy and what I want to maintain and help the government or whoever the agencies are to guard my freedom of expression.
Then let's just talk about the data protection bill as well, because that has also come about recently. And with that also, there was this debate on privacy and on data and who can possibly share it and access it. There was a controversy. The bill was earlier withdrawn as well. Now it's come back in a reworked form and it's passed through Parliament. It's become an act. Saumya, your views?
So I want to quickly respond to some of the comments here because I feel like there are two pro-privacy and anti-privacy and one pro-privacy. So I want to come at this because I disagree on various accounts. So the first one being the telephone directory example. Now, it's not like people were less private back in the day. It's just that we did not have mobile phones. And I think some journalist has already tweeted this right now in my phone, there are about 1,000 unread messages and not one of them is by a human being. Because our data is harvested, we get these adverts in our mobile phones all the time. Back in the day when we had telephone directories, we also had landline phones. So it's not that the need for privacy is new, it's the context and technology is new, which is why the state is feeling the need to respond to it. The second point I want to make, which is basically about the narrative is making me feel like we're saying that in some capacity, the right to privacy is somehow an elitist right. It's a figment of the elite imagination. I think that argument itself, to think of privacy as an elite concern, is elitist, because actually it is a mass concern. People who are most affected by violation of privacy are the most vulnerable. I'll give you one example. Special Marriage Act. Interreligious couples entering into interreligious marriages. Their marriage notice is displayed in front of a court where they've registered their marriage for about 30 days. In extreme circumstances, that has led to honor killings. In less extreme circumstances, that has led to parental intervention in such marriages. So actually, it is very much for the masses, for the most vulnerable. The third and the final point I want to make for the lack of time is that, when we say that certain rights have their origins in, aristocracy from many, many years ago, we have to realize that rights were never based on mass appeal. When we were given the right to freedom of speech, it's not like the Constituent Assembly had a conversation with us about whether you want it or not, right? It was actually about, let's say, right to divorce in India, right? 1950s. It did not have mass appeal, but it was necessary. Widow remarriage did not have mass appeal. It's a colonial legislation. Do we say it was a bad legislation now? It's not. Just because it has its roots in colonialism doesn't mean it wasn't a necessary legislation. So the very fact that we think that rights should somehow be based on this idea of mass appeal goes against political science 101, that rights are meant to be entities that evolve over time. They are layered because of context. And privacy is what it is because liberty is different now. Right to life, right to liberty looks different.
Very interesting points made by you. Yes.
I need
Quick
to
rebuttal, Manu.
address this. I feel that the problem with social reformation, by the way, I personally, as a person, I agree with all these sophisticated rights. They're all very nice. And all. But the problem with social reformation is that it takes a lot of credit for natural forces, Like, for example, that's why I said the rights from antiquity are rights that people take, whether the world wants to give it or not. You touch a person's child 400 years ago, there would be consequences. A person wanted to live. A person wanted to believe in a supernatural being in every village. And later on, slightly more sophisticated people come, and they can't fight against these forces. And of course, they had to reform the barbarians. They kind of try to formulate the natural forces as rights. Okay, and all the rights that won are rights that people wanted. That's why I feel that it is an important dimension to take.
But interestingly, Saumya made the point earlier that because now social media era has come, now the phone age has come, where everyone has a mobile phone. That's what makes it its mass
also,
appeal
natural rights didn't evolve in some complete vacuum.
Manu.
Natural rights has a very long theory. Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau. They're all people thinking about
Manu.
what is natural, what
and
is
also
not.
your thoughts on the
natural.
digital data protection bill, because that has also spurred this debate.
Yeah, of course. So there is, of course, a difference in qualitative data from the time when people had just landline and the mobile phones now. But I don't agree that people were as private then as they are now. In fact, even now, if you move away from the English-speaking people, even in Delhi or Bombay, the way people are intrusive, it's a very Indian thing. Okay, you're sitting in a train and you're a girl who's 28 years old, some stranger is going to ask, are you married? And then Indian Railways has fixed more marriages than Shadi.com. How do you think that happens? Okay, that's a certain Indian way of speaking, which is very not Western, it's not sophisticated. We say things. In fact, Ram Gopal Verma, the film director, once told me they had to inform a man that his son is dead. He was run over by a train. A complete stranger from his film crew goes to the old man and says, God gives, God takes, and then he breaks the news. That's how we are. We have no boundaries. It might look crude now when you think you're not crude. Okay, so that's a different issue altogether.
You're getting responses, yes.
One last thing I want to say, and I think we'll have to wrap up. We are as intrusive into privacy as we allow ourselves to be. The internet today, social media today, it's such a booming success because we want it that way. So deep down inside, the human instinct, let me finish. The human instinct, we're all voyeurs and exhibitionists at some point.
The viewer wants that, but do the people
we are voyeurs, because we are also narcissists. I think privacy needs narcissism.
I understand that. I'm a psychologist, and I will make my last point, whether or not it's like you agree with it or not. So I feel that deep down inside, covertly, we are all voyeurs and exhibitionists. We love gossip.
And when a person becomes a public figure, do you believe they sign up then for the scrutiny? Because there are those like Virat Kohli and Anushka who say, why are you entering my bedroom to get photos of a baby?
That the moment you're a public figure, all boundaries are dropped.
Even a politician?
Completely. Completely. They should be totally transparent. Why should you be embarrassed?
I think just because we might be characterized as a verbose or intrusive society, that's no reason to not have a conversation about right to privacy. And I do have to reiterate that I completely agree between the crude sophistication binary. I think right to privacy is most useful to people who are, socially at literally the most vulnerable.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, I was just, the question I want to raise, as I said at the beginning of my talk, I find the word fundamental very interesting. Now, what is a fundamental right? There is a sense that it's a basic instinct. Can something so new be fundamental? Or can only
new.
What is old?
It's not new. I don't think privacy is new.
I'll tell you, there is a reason why privacy was not mentioned in the Constitution, because at that time, when they mentioned the 6 fundamental laws, there's a reason. But of course, they found it important.
Property was mentioned. It's no longer fundamental. Rights evolve.
No, the reason why it was not mentioned.
Concept.
I'm just saying it is a new concept. The reason why the people who wrote the Constitution did not specifically mention it as a fundamental right, that is an evidence that it was important. Okay. It is always important, but it's very new.
Okay, well...
Privacy was, last point. Privacy was very fundamental, which is why when a woman went to a police station to say, please register a case of domestic violence, they would say, ghar ka masla hai, right? That was what privacy was historically, and that's why it's always been something that's affected women, that's affected vulnerable members of our society. So it's not like we suddenly started thinking of it. We were always told that household is private, and privacy meant that in that privacy, you could do whatever you write, and that could also mean violation. It's not something new.
I think privacy is very personal.
Yes.
The levels of privacy are not absolute.
Okay.
I'm okay with my life being out there because I have written and I believe in candid writing.
Okay. Well, thank you all. This is a conversation I think that we could have carried on through the day. A very, very riveting discussion. And this is why we're called the Festival of Ideas, because we're going to be discussing all ideas. Pro the motion, against the motion, and of course, those who want to sit on the fence as well. Thank you all.